Hi there, students! I'm XS. That's little x, little s, which stands for extra sweet, because that's what I am. I'm a puppy-sensei, and I make Japanese content to help you level up your abilities. Last week, we spent some time together talking about issho ni. Issho ni is a small construction in the Japanese language that we can incorporate into our sentences to mean that we want to do something together with someone else. I also said that we can use this issho ni form sometimes to talk about other people doing something together. So when we witness two people doing something, we can say that they are doing that thing issho ni, together, right? That's the way that we use issho ni. Today's grammar drop is a little bit of a companion to that concept, because today we're going to be learning a verbal conjugation that frequently ends up getting linked with that issho ni form. Let's talk about it, and we'll discuss why it kind of goes hand in hand with issho ni. Okay? So for today, we're going to be looking at verb plus mashou. That's a verb ending conjugation that kind of means let's do this verb. Whatever the verb is, it means like let's do it, right? So I think it should be relatively obvious right off the bat why issho ni and mashou end up getting used really frequently together, because in many cases you're going to have sentences that kind of look like this one. Issho ni undo shimashou. What are we doing here? We're making a suggestion, and that suggestion is that we undo suru, right? So undo suru would be the verb before conjugation. After conjugation, it becomes undo shimashou, which means let's work out, or let's do some kind of movement in some respect, right? So we're using that with that issho ni because we're saying let's do it together. Issho ni undo shimashou. Let's work out together. Obviously, the part that we're really honed in on today is that mashou verb ending, yeah? I've said this before, but in Japanese, a whole lot of information is ultimately passed along through the conjugation of Japanese verbs. Japanese verbs are very robust. That means that verbs conjugate to do a whole lot of things in Japanese, and they can pass a whole lot of meaning on just through their conjugation styles. Through verb conjugation, of course, we can express things like tense, register, which is a fancy linguistics term for politeness or formality, and then also whether something is positive or negative, whether you do the thing or you don't do the thing, right? All those things really easily conveyed through verbal conjugation, and we've talked about that before. But with Japanese, there are also plenty of other things that we can express through conjugation, and more often than not, we're going to do so through agglutination. Agglutination is when we take additional conjugation forms and we kind of stick them together on the end of the verb, making the verb bigger and more robust and telling us more information. There are cases where we can stack 4 or 5 different conjugation structures on the back of a verb to express plenty of things all at once. And not always, but in most cases, everything that we stack on the end of a verb scopes over the entire sentence. So when we turn a verb at the end of the sentence into a negative verb, that usually means that the whole sentence is negative. When a verb appears at the end of the sentence and it's in polite form, that usually means that our whole sentence is in polite form. Mashou is going to be interesting because it's actually pretty common for mashou to be in the final placement in terms of conjugation. And that's because with mashou, you're suggesting that something happens. And so usually you don't end up conjugating it any further than that because you're basically just saying, let's do this thing. And that tends to be kind of the end of your sentence. Technically, this mashou is already in polite form. We can actually create the plain form of the same suggestion form for sentences, and it's going to end up looking something like this. So we started with issho ni undo shimashou, and in the plain form, it will look like issho ni undo shiyou. More about this soon. The plain form isn't really meant to be the focus of this lesson, but it's okay to take a moment here and talk about what we're actually seeing. This is the verb suru, and it's been conjugated to take the presumptive ending yo. And what we see here is suru in the plain form is going to become shiyo to mean let's do it. And shimasu in the polite form would become shimashou, let's do it, right? Same thing, just one is in the plain and the other is in the polite. This will hold true for all verbs, not just suru. That's just the one that I gave you here as a reference. If you see, the reason that I'm starting you with the mashou form, the polite form, and not the plain form, is because the mashou form is very easy to predict. If you know the mas form of any verb, whatever it is, if you know the polite form that ends in mas, we create the mashou form very easily. It's just a matter of changing the mas and conjugating it as mashou, and instantly you've created a situation where you are suggesting that you do that verb with someone. This holds true for any verb ever, so take a look at these polite verbs, right? We have mimasu, that means to see or to look, and when we turn that into the let's do form, we get mimashou, let's look at it. So mimasu becomes mimashou. Tabemasu, which means to eat, becomes tabemashou, let's eat. Asobimasu, which means to play, becomes asobimashou, let's play. Not really related to a let's play, but that doesn't matter. Kimasu, which means to arrive or to come, becomes kimashou, let's arrive, right? So we might use that as issho ni kimashou. Let's arrive together. Maybe you're going to a party and you want to go at the same time. Issho ni kimashou. The mashou form is really rather elementary in comparison with the plain form, because the plain form, as we've seen in other cases, is kind of frequently going to require that you engage in a little bit of sound change. So if we look at these examples of the plain form, right, we're going to see the following. These are the same verbs. In the plain form, we have miru, to look, taberu, to eat, asobu, to play, and kuru, which means to arrive, right? And I hope you see what I mean here, right? It's just a little bit more complicated. Miru is going to become miyo. Okay, that's not terrible, right? Not too hard. So we're just dropping the ru and we're adding yo. Taberu is also pretty easy. So taberu drops the ru and it becomes tabeyo. But then we get to asobu, right? Which we know is a godan verb, and that's going to become asobo. Ne? Asobu becomes asobo. And kuru, which we know is an irregular verb, is going to become koyo. And this is why we say that kuru is an irregular verb, because that's a pretty weird conjugation. Koyo. Ne? So, the plain form does require a bit more brain power to nail down compared to the mas form. Again, that's not specifically what I wanted to talk to you about today. What I did want to talk about is the way that issho ni and mashou tend to interact with one another. That's because the mashou form is all about making a suggestion to somebody else. You're suggesting an action. You're saying, let's do this thing. And that kind of narrows down the scope of what your sentence could possibly mean within a context. Because what are you really saying? You have to be talking to somebody, and you have to be saying, I want to do an action together with you. We're making a suggestion. And so, as a result, we're really frequently going to see it used in conjunction with that issho ni segment that we learned last week. So we're often going to see sentences that look like this. Issho ni tabemashou. Let's eat together. That makes perfect sense, doesn't it? Because the issho ni form is frequently used to mean together with, and the mashou form is always talking about making a suggestion for some activity, usually together with the person that you're talking to. And so it's only natural that we're going to see kind of suggested activities that we're doing together with the listener. That's why ishoni really frequently appears with mashou. But the thing is, and this is really important, while mashou really frequently goes with ishoni, the opposite does not exactly hold true. And that's because ishoni can frequently be used to talk about what other people are doing together. And I explained this last week. We could have sentences where I'm talking about two people doing something together, and that's not going to be a mashou type sentence, because a mashou type sentence almost always indicates that you want to do something together with the listener, or maybe together with a group, right? Since you don't necessarily use the mashou form to talk about other people doing different actions, but rather only to make suggestions of actions you want to do with someone else, it's clear that ishoni is going to appear in a much wider variety of sentences in comparison to the mashou form. There's a last point that I want to make about the use of this particular type of grammar, this suggesting things mashou form, right? I've already established with you that for this verb conjugation, we have a plain form, like shio, and we have a polite form, like shimashou. But actually, you can even bump the politeness up even further by adding ka to the end of your sentence. And we end up with a sentence like this one. 一緒に食べましょうか? 一緒に食べましょうか? The nuance is really not all that different here. But by adding ka to the end of the sentence, you're allowing the listener a greater potential for refusal. You're basically saying, would you like to do this? As opposed to, let's do this. On its own, mashou sort of implies that you're pretty sure that the listener is going to respond affirmatively. You're pretty sure that you're going to get a yes when you suggest this action. It's like, let's eat together, when you can assume that your schedules are really likely to align, and you know that you're probably going to be at the same place at the same time, and you think that the person likes you, and you're probably going to be eating some similar food, and so you're making that suggestion with that mashou to say, hey, let's do this. We already know it's going to work out. Let's do it. But by adding ka and creating the mashou ka form, it makes it sound much more like you're asking somebody on a date. デートしましょうか? Should we go on a date? Date with Puppy-sensei video when? There's another structure that functions very similarly in Japanese, and that's the masenka construction. And so next week, we're going to spend some time talking about how mashouka and masenka are a little bit different. I'm looking forward to it. See you then. また来週!